except certain part of India, that is Punjab, Haryana, where you find that technology is making certain amount of impact. What has happened is that except this region, certain region, where the real wage has remained constant, it has not increased rapidly, it has remained constant. In rest of the part of the India, the real wage has really gone up. Number one. So we do not have a sufficient evidence to show that the real wage has gone up as a result of new technology. Number two, that in the beginning, the employment has increased as a result of impact of biochemical technology. But in the later stage, you will find that the employment is going down in most of these technologically advanced areas, simply because now they are using more of mechanical technology, more of tractor, more of harvest combiner, more of threshers. As a result, the total employment per acre is going down in most of these areas. There are employment elasticity which are showing that the employment is gradually going down. I mean, this will happen. I mean, most of the countries where there is a mechanization, this should happen. But in India, it has come at a wrong time. We need the employment now, and here is a farming community which is going for a mechanization. So, what you find is, what is the argument of these people, and there is sufficient statistical evidence to show that the green revolution has not benefited the margin than the small farmer, simply because they do not have resources to use this technology. The laboring class has been helped to certain extent in certain part, but not in all region as such. In the beginning, yes, there was an increase in the real wage as such, and you find certain improvement in the standard of living in Punjab. But in rest of the part, you find that the wage level is not going up. Employment is continuously going down. As a result, you have more of employed people. Now, let me summarize. I think I have taken a lot of time. I'll summarize within five minutes. What can we say about now on the basis of this certain amount of statistics? I think what exactly has been happening is as follows, and this is the process that is to be found in most of the developing countries as such. That population pressure is certainly there. The population is growing at a much rapid rate. The labor force is going at a much rapid rate, and we have not been able to increase the employment in relation to the supply of the labor force. As a result, employment remains. So you find that the population pressure is still there. This very population pressure is increasing the number of the small farmers to subdivision and fragmentation of holding. So what you have is that the population pressure really creates a large chunk of small and marginal farmers. Per capita land is going down. But having granted that the population pressure has its own role in marginalizing the rural community, in creating more of small and marginal farmer, increasing the pressure on the land. At the same time, after the mid-60s, what you find that the new technology, which was expected to be scale neutral, which was supposed to increase the employment, which was supposed to increase the real wages, it has not really shown a very, very strong positive impact on this poor section of the community. In terms of increasing the income of the small farmer, in terms of increasing the real wage level, or in terms of increasing the employment. Now, there are other one or two points that I would like to put forth before you. That because of the commercialization and the capitalization of the agriculture in some part of this country, you see a process of polarization coming up in Pakistan, in India. Now, how is it happening? The prices of land, it has really gone up because the productivity has gone up. Now, small farmer is not ready to sell the land because land is a very important commodity. He is not ready to forgo his land, but certainly there is a pressure on him. So what we find is that the small farmer is leasing out certain amount of land to the large farmer. He is not able to cultivate the land because it requires a lot of capital. So he prefers to turn into a partial agricultural landless laborer and rent out his land. Now this indicates that the reverse tendency is going from the small farmer to the large farmer. The concentration of land is coming up in the hand of the large farmer. It may not be in the form of ownership holding, but it is certainly in the form of operational holding, because there are restrictions from the side of the government to own certain amount of land. But there are no restriction on renting in and renting out. Now the small farmer, because of the economic pressure, are certainly leasing out the land, and as a result, you find that the concentration of operational holding is coming up. So small farmer, under the economic pressure, tend to losing the control over his land, and polarization process seems to be existing there. Now let me make a last point, and then I think I'll stop here, because it has been quite a complex affair. What has been happening as agriculture as a whole? Let us put this whole situation together, that there has been an increase in the output in agriculture production, increase in the agriculture output, 95% over some 30-35 years. But the labor force employed in agriculture has not reduced. Agriculture employed around 66% of the labor force in 1950, and it employed 63% in 1981. There has been a growth in agriculture output, but the labor force employed in agriculture has almost remained constant. As a result, the per capita income remained constant. Now, the per capita income remained constant, but it doesn't mean that the per capita income of all the section remained constant. The income of the large and the small farmer went up, and that of small and marginal farmer has remained constant. In fact, there are figures which indicate that the share of the labor in total output has gone down. Now, the classical model still, that doesn't matter. I mean, along with the economic development, that is what happened. Kuznets will tell you that yes, as there is increase in as there is economic growth, the share of agriculture in income goes down, and share of industry goes up. But at the same time, the employment in agriculture goes down and employment in industry goes up. That is what has happened here. You had 70% of population here in agriculture long back, 70 years before or so. Now you have 3% in America. Agriculture contributes a very small proportion of income. It is industry, non-agriculture which contributes. So that has been a classical pattern everywhere, that the role of agriculture gets reduced in terms of employment as well as in terms of income. But this shift has to be synchronized shift. Now what is happening in most of the developing countries, this is very surprising, that you don't find this classical model being there. What is happening is this, that while the income share of industry is going up and that of agriculture going down in the total income, industry is contributing more of labor, more of income to the total. But it is not absorbing additional labor force that exists in agriculture. In India, the manufacturing sector, which is supposed to really give employment, the manufacturing sector, it employed 10% of the total workforce in 1951, and 9%, and in 81 it employed only 10%. His income share has gone up. Manufacturing is contributing larger share of income, but it is not absorbing labor. It is whatever decline has occurred in agriculture, it has occurred simply because of unorganized sector. Unorganized employment has increased from 20 to 23%. So whatever decline was there from agriculture to non-agriculture, it was absorbed by unorganized sector, not by organized sector. What I am trying to emphasize upon you is this, that there has been a growth in industry, but it has been a capital intensive growth. In the beginning, in most of the European countries and American situation is that in the beginning you have the capital labor intensive growth, and gradually with the innovation then you will switch over to the capital intensive technology. But most of the developing countries get the ready-made capital intensive technology from Europe and America, and so they mechanize their operation, they capitalize their industrial sector much more rapidly than what the Western countries have really done. So they are doing at a wrong time. So what you find is that in industry output is going without generating additional amount of employment. In agriculture, although late, there also the use of machinery is coming at a very fast. Employment is getting reduced as such. So what you have essentially is the capital intensive growth without providing a certain amount of employment to the people. So you find that the problem of unemployment and then the problem of poverty remains. Let me quote these figures and then I think I will stop, because these are quite interesting figures. That our agriculture production has increased per capita. If you take total agriculture output and divide by the population, the per capita output is 200 kg food grain production, and that it's a fairly big satisfactory figure. But our consumption level is 185 kg. So you have a higher amount of output available with you. India has got embarrassing stocks, buffer stock, 29 million tons. So what you have 200 kg per capita, while the consumption is 185 kg. You might say that they have satisfied their food consumption needs, so they don't need any more. But you see that there are 42% of the people who do not have enough of food. What does that mean? That simply means that you have the production through the capital intensive technology. You don't generate employment, you don't give money, you don't give purchasing power. So there are people who do not have money, who do not have employment, who do not have purchasing power, and they can't buy the increased production. You may have increased production through use of machinery and less of labor. So you have the production, but you don't have the employment, enough employment to generate, enough income to be given to the laborer, and they don't have purchasing power. So the consumption remain at a lower level. The income elasticity of consumption for food is supposed to be 0.03. What does that mean? That if there is a 1% increase in the income, demand for food consumption increased by 0.03, while it should be around 0.05 for most of the developing countries. So it is basically a demand trend. What Keynes talk of deficiency of demand, that you don't have enough of demand. You had a depression in 1932. You don't have enough of demand, although you have a production through capitalization of the process. But you don't have a demand simply because you don't have employment, you don't have purchasing power. So that is the trap where most of the developing countries we have, I think. The problem is that we know how growth to be achieved. We have a satisfactory growth, rather remarkable growth, but this growth has not trickled down to the poor. I mean, they are waiting for 35 years up to see that some drop of growth will come down. Thank you very much.
I just have a couple comments. First of all, you talk about inputs of green revolution varieties being seed, irrigation, fertilizer. But I want to ask you, what about now? I think that is one really very big input that the new high-yielding varieties require that isn't easily imparted on small farmers. And again, many of these high-yielding varieties are hybrids that cannot be used more than, after they are planted, they can't be used again. But I think perhaps the biggest comment I have to make is that you continually, throughout your speech, here in 1989, you kept saying the farmer he. When in fact, I have read over and over again, over 60% of the food produced in Asia is grown by women. Now that might be one of the problems. I think that you just did not hit on it all within this whole, phenomenon that you discussed tonight. Two countries in particular that come to mind when I think of women growing most of the food are China and Thailand. And many implements that you mentioned tonight as being, part of the capitalist problem are masculine, in that they are made for men, with men in mind, and they are extended by men. And many of the small farmers in Asia are women. Most large farmers are men. And I would venture to say, you said the number of small farmers is increasing in Asia, and India in particular. And again, I don't have any experience in India, but I can't help but think throughout the rest of Southeast Asia, mostly small farmers are or might be women. And I think that this is a problem we have to address that you didn't touch on at all. And I think that maybe you should be more conscious of, when you speak, it's not to say the farmer he, because we can't assume that the farmer is a he. And even if you say, I was talking generically, you speak to an audience, let's say you're out in the field and you're speaking to a group of small farmers or a group of villagers, and you're speaking like you were tonight, saying the farmer is he. But there are women in the group who are also farmers, but because you're addressing the group as a farmer he, they're under the impression that they don't think their role is important. So I think that's a very important issue to think about.
Okay, let me take your first problem of the role of knowledge and in the adoption of new technology. The new technology, in fact, requires new knowledge. I mean, it cannot help. I mean, you cannot go ahead with the new technology with the traditional knowledge. So you have to have new knowledge as such. I mean, how much amount of fertilizer to be used, whether it is phosphate or potash or other kind of fertilizer to be used, which kind of variety to be used, and in which soil. What are the number of watering to be given? If there is a specific pest, and this is what kind of insecticide and pesticides to be given. And given the large amount of illiterate farmer, the role of education is very, very important. But you cannot really then wait for the literacy level to go up and then introduce the new technology. Now, in India and most of the developing countries, they have tried to take care of this phenomena by having a fairly decentralized system of extension. So what you have is basically, for example, you have a taluk, which is equivalent to your country. You have an extension office there, and there are large number of extension worker and extension officer. They are supposed to go to the villages, and through the network of village, at the village level you have village panchayat or cooperative credit society, whatever. It is the extension worker who is supposed to go there and help the farmer in educating them as to how this technology should be used. Now, it's another question whether the small farmer and the marginal farmer has got access to this extension worker or not. And I think there is a problem there. The large farmer who has got a better access with the power, better access with this network, he is able to get more benefit out of this extension network than the small farmer to some extent. Number one. Number two, large farmer is in a still more better position because large farmer in general have a higher level of education. Not only that the literacy is high, but his education level is high. And he is able to, he has an input what is called knowledge, which he can make use of as compared to the small farmer. Now this is one thing. But I think most of the developing countries are trying to take the care of this aspect through the decentralized system of extension. It may not be on a full scale, it may not be a very good system, but certainly we at least in India, we have a fairly large decentralized system of extension. The only phenomena is that one has to implement. As far as the second question is concerned, I think I agree with you. That when I was talking of household, I am talking of farmer, I am not talking of he farmer, I am talking of farming unit.
You said he.
Let me clarify that. Well, I agree, I must agree. We are slightly changing, we in India, we are trying to change now from chairman to chairperson, and in every area now we are trying to make a change. But I must accept that there has been a tremendous growth of women's studies in India. Recently we have an Institute of Women's Studies in Delhi, where this phenomena has been, we have become quite aware that among the labor force, 50% of the labor force comes from the female folk. Their productivity may be higher, but their wage level is invariably, every study shows that the wage level of the female folk is low. In addition to female, you have the child labor, which is a growing phenomena that is coming up in some of these countries. And at the nutrition level, they found that the consumption by the women is lower than the men. And the woman being the mother, she will see to it that the milk is the first priority of the child, and then second of his husband. And whatever residual element is there is her consumption. So that area has really is coming up as such. I quite agree with you that within the household also women are subject to some kind of a discrimination unknowingly, invisibly, in terms of work, in terms of consumption level, and in several other areas. But in India, I must tell you that there is a tremendous recognition of this. We have, especially you will find that there are a number of women organizations, mostly organized by the left-wing parties, in Delhi and around and other areas. They have been very, very active as a matter of fact, and whenever there is some kind of issue, they are very conscious about that.
I just want to make some comments.
Yes.
The first one has to do with the model what you use in the analysis of the speech.
Yes.
In that model, most models are closed in the sense that the variables in there are predetermined. Poverty in the model that you use is an assumed thing. It must result from that model. See, if there's a model that will wipe out poverty, there will be no problem. But there's no model that will wipe out poverty. All models can do is reduce the effect of poverty. So given that basic assumption, to try to fight poverty in a system that you are using a model that already believes that it's a consequence of the operation of that model seems to be a very hard task to me.
Yes.
And you see, if you use a classical model, it assumes poverty. There's no question about that. There must be rich, there must be poor. How poor is the poor going to be is a different issue. That's what we are fighting about now. But it doesn't mean that there won't be poor people. The model assumes poor people must exist. That's number one. Number two, poverty is defined or seen through narrowly. It is not lack of money. It's really lack of power. And the result of poverty is lack of money. But the cause of poverty is not lack of money, it's lack of power. If the people who are talking about are powerful, they will turn things around. They will be the rich people and so on and so forth. The point I'm trying to say is poverty is really a given situation in any society is lack of power. And so every society tend to have those set of people to justify the existence or to build on its own. Let me give you an example. In the factors of production, you reward factors differently. Why do we reward capital more than labor? These are the problem. I mean, and that's the sense of poverty itself. You have capital, labor, land, and so on and so forth. But you don't reward them according to their productivity, or if you do, you pay more attention to the owner of capital than the owner of labor. That's why you have landed labor and laborers. And that's another comment that you have to be very careful about. The model assumes poverty. And that is why I said, look, if we don't grow, we can distribute. So let us grow first. If we grow enough, then we can then come back and worry about how to distribute. But by the time we are growing, some people are already distributing.
Yes.
So by the time you come to then face the question of distribution, you have more people around you. So these are the questions. The model is assuming poverty. The poverty thing is defined too narrowly. It is lack of power, the way I look at it.
Yes. May I? Now, I quite agree with you. I think I could not cover so many points. I mean, nobody deny that, in most of this country, you look into the World Bank report or you look into any studies that deals with poverty or poor, the basic phenomena of poverty is the lack of resources. Lack of income generating asset with a certain section of the community. Now, in rural area, in agriculture, the major source of poverty is the unequal distribution of income. The land being the major source of income, the land being the major asset. And this very asset is unequally distributed in most of this country. So the poverty has a root in the economic power, of a certain section of the community. It is the distribution of land and other asset. Now that generates the political power, that generates the other power also. But since you don't have a command over the certain means of production, which is the predominant means of production, namely the land, that around 60% of the people, either they do not have a land, or even if they have a land, they have a very small amount of land. So these are the people without any resources, and that is the basic reason as to why they are poor. They are not able to take the advantage of the whatever kind of growth that you are going to visualize as such. So, the remedy, there are several remedies. I have not touched upon the remedies. I have only analyzed the whole situation, because given the land distribution, given the unequal land distribution, you are imposing the deregulation technology on this agrarian structure. What is its implication for income distribution and poor? There are alternatives. The policy implications are many. The policy implication is that you go for a heavy land reform. Have an equal distribution of land, if not equal distribution of land, but have certain radical land reform. Give land to certain section of the community. You impose the ceiling, and that is what has been done. But land reform has a strong political economy aspect. You cannot really have a radical land reform given the political structure. Land reform, yes.
It has been done in West Bengal, but has there been any impact in land reform?
West Bengal,
I'm told it has been done, or it is being done.
Well, as far as we had a two wave of land reform. One wave of land reform was 1961. There were many problems in that. We made improvement in 1971 and tried to cover up. But by that time, the lot of adjustment was already made. But West Bengal has recently gone with, West Bengal has a communist government, for your information, and West Bengal has gone recently for a fairly radical land reform in tenancy. In West Bengal, the proportion of tenant is pretty large, because the land distribution is highly unequal in West Bengal. It used to be, and it is. As a result, the large farmer lease out their land to the small farmer and the tenant. So a tenant is a very predominant section of West Bengal economy, but at the same time they didn't have enough right. In spite of the fact that the land reform may make a provision that if you are a tenant, if you can prove it, that you are a tenant for some time, you can get the ownership of the land. But it was difficult to give him the land, make him an owner. First thing, that he didn't have enough of resources to buy the land. Second thing, that he could not face this court. Another thing. But now, what is called Operation Barga in Bengali language, that the first thing what they have done is that to identify the sharecropper first. So you know that this is the quantity of the sharecropper or the tenant. Once you identify them, once you register them, then you give them certain amount of right. You make them owner, or you make him a secure tenant. So I think radical land reform is going on in West Bengal. We are yet to see the result of that. Many tenants have been given ownership and at least some security as such.
In a lot of the West developed countries, sometimes there are kinds of protectionist policies in the manufacturing sector and the secondary sector, which are designed to protect domestic industries and various other kinds of policies which sometimes encourage capital-intensive industries from franchises to corporations from Western countries and so on. And the growth of manufacturing exports, for example, might be one kind of symptom of productivity in the export sectors of these countries, which would be some indicator, at least, of the ability to substitute employment opportunities in the secondary sector for agriculture. I don't know about India. That's what I was curious about. What has been the manufacturing export growth experience, or what has been what are the policy stances in India towards? I mean, a lot of other countries are highly protectionist, but I was curious about what's India's experience in terms of their policies towards protection against domestic manufacturing or as well.
We have throughout we have a protection of we have a policy of protection. As a matter of fact, we built up our own industry, basic industries, with a lot of protection, and even other industries were given a lot of protection. And one of the reasons why the capital intensive technology has come up is there. But now I think we are now increasingly we are benefiting out of that, and our export is growing up, mostly in electrical and light engineering as such. As against India, Pakistan has done much better. To begin with, it being a small country, they had little of resources. They went ahead with the small engineering sector and with the labor-intensive technology. So they have been, in spite of 3 and 1% growth rate in the population and the labor force, they have been able to solve their problem of unemployment. But to begin with, we went for the capital-intensive technology as such. But in terms of export, we are getting some benefit out of that. So
in
then,
big countries like India, I suppose there's much more domestic competition. In very
Yes.
small countries, a lot of times it results in highly monopolistic kind of
yes.
manufacturing
Yes.
structure.
Yes. But we are only worried. I mean, I will repeat that. I'll just come to you in a minute. We are only worried on account that if you classify the industry into two sectors, two sub-sectors, unorganized sector and the organized sector, which is the manufacturing sector. Now, this manufacturing sector, its income share is certainly going up at a very rapid rate, 4%, 5%. There may be different opinion on that. But the labor absorption has been in proportionate terms, of course. Absolute term it has gone up. But
It has gone up.
in absolute term is that. But if you take the total workforce in India and treat it as 100, total workforce in India, manufacturing used to employ something like 9% in 1951. And in 1981, it employed around 10% or 10 point something. So you can see that in proportionate term, the labor absorptive capacity of the manufacturing sector has been almost constant. Now there has been a decline in the employment in the agriculture sector by 3%, 3 to 4%. That all decline has gone to the unorganized sector, which is a small informal sector as such, where it is a labor intensive to some certain extent, but where the labor wages are pretty low in our unorganized sector, where the labor exploitation is far more, labors are not organized. Now that we are really worried. I mean, the policymakers are also worried that what do we do about it? That even the non-agriculture sector is not able to absorb the urban unemployed. What to talk of rural unemployed?
In a lot of countries, there's a sort of protection towards very capital-intensive kind of imported manufacturing technology, and it seems to me that that's just not encouraged in substitution from the agricultural sector.
That is what has exactly happened.
And I don't see how these things can go, unless they're complementary, unless the secondary sector is allowed to absorb some of the labor from the agricultural labor force, and I don't see how you have this process of raising wages in the low-income agriculture sector.
I quite agree with you. I mean, that is what has exactly happened because there was a lot of protection to the Indian manufacturer.
And the infant industry,
yes.
And all this.
Yes, but now you find that there is a fair amount of liberalization under the leadership of new Prime Minister. The whole series of liberalization process has gone up, and the restriction on the private sector has been reduced quite a lot in licensing and tax and whatnot. Let us see what's the impact of that. I mean, it's a very, very recent phenomenon. Yes, please.
In this awareness democracy of the world, and you said
you could repeat.
You said before that economic reforms and things like that could come from the government, which they did. I mean, India has a very excellent extension program. And I know like in the 60s, the Peace Corps in particular was very active in India, especially in Ludhiana and Punjab. And I was,
What was
Peace
that?
Corps.
Peace Corps.
American
Peace
Peace Corps.
Corps.
And I mean, they worked in conjunction with the extension program.
Yes.
But I was curious, how much influence did outside Western nations have in the Green Revolution with technology and the advising? I know that they were there, but I was really curious as to, you've been talking about poverty being a lack of resources. Did they, in fact, enhance
Oh, yes.
that, or?
Well, this is a very interesting question. In fact, somewhere around early 50s, a gene of the present HIV rice was imported from Japan in Esquiko. A gentleman called Borlaug, he made a successful attempt and a variety was developed, and a order of 18,000 ton of high-yielding variety of wheat was sent by government of India. It was taken to Indian Institute of Agriculture Research. By the way, the agriculture technology cannot be straight away transferred. I mean, it has to be indigenized, as a matter of fact. We have a fairly extensive research network as such. So some of these varieties were tested in Indian Agriculture Research Institute. We have Indian Council of Agriculture Research, then varieties of Agriculture University and Agriculture Research Institute. A gentleman from one of the institute is sitting here. So there was a lot of research, but this technology basically came from outside. But the other question, which is very important, is that what has been the role of outside countries? And I would say that it is the United States of America which really started this whole concept of development. In 1951, a team was invited from USA to look into the food problem of India. There is a book written by this committee, a report was submitted by this committee. So they first recommended community development of infrastructure facility in rural area. So from 1951 to around 60s, we had a heavy community development program. We thought that if there is an improvement in health, transport, road, communication and everything, efficiency of the farming community will go up. Infrastructure is the basic obstacle, that was the understanding. And yet then we find a problem. Then another team was of course invited, and that has been a base of the subsequent policies as such. This committee recommend the intensive agriculture development approach. And on the basis of the recommendation of this committee, in fact, what has happened that we identify around 100 districts, this district has got enough of water resources, enough of infrastructure facility, marketing facility, credit network, and it is in this district we decided to use high-yielding varieties of seed. So this was called intensive district agriculture development program. After 3 years, it was extended to intensive area development program. But this basically originated, this concept of intensive agriculture district program basically originated out of the team, US team, and the Indian economists. Indian economists have played a very, very important role. In fact, they have been absolutely active people as such. We have a planning commission where these economists apply their mind through 5-year plan, and the whole thing is done through the planning commission as such. It was not the one-way business, but we were really trying to share the experience of the advanced country. So US had a lot of share in framing our policies of agriculture development as such. Yes.
Just along a little bit different point, it seems that HYVs might have been an over ambitious and sort of naive development in terms of ecological and evolutionary terms. I think now there is literature coming out that is documenting that yields are decreasing in the long run 20 years later since some of the varieties have been used, and susceptibility to pests has gone up. This might, I think, have, in terms, not an economic basis, but another basis, have long-term ecological consequences and disastrous consequences for the small farmer, because extension knowledge has replaced traditional knowledge, and more importantly, HYVs have replaced the diversity of varieties that small farmers used to keep on their farms, the ones who have participated, which would mean, and that was the way that they guarded against fluctuations in climate or lots of other things. They had a variety of
species that they grew especially ripe, which means if it turns out that the HYVs don't have sustained increased productivity, the small farmer now is even more vulnerable, where the rich farmer has the capital to guard against fluctuations in the future. He can buy the new HYVs, and or she can buy a new HYV. That's a tough thing to change, though. So I just think that's another dimension that even though the whole model is based on HYVs increasing production, that you can become.
No, I quite agree with you. I mean, I quite agree with you that one thing you must remember that I mean, in the beginning as well, that is what happened in US also. In the beginning, when you have a tremendous pressure of demand for agriculture output, you are depending on the outside world for food, and you don't have a guarantee that you will get it. So, irrespective of their side effect, the country, the farmer goes for use of iodine variety of seeds simply because that it is going to increase your income as such. He doesn't bother much, he or she doesn't bother much of so far as its impact on other ecological parameters are concerned. But I must tell one thing, that we developing country, we are in a relatively better position in one respect, that we can learn very in advance from you, that what has been the impact of HYV and fertilizer on the soil, what has been the impact of excessive irrigation on the salinity of the soil and other things. So we can take certain precaution well in advance as far as impact of this HYV technologies is concerned, and that we are doing, I think, to a certain extent.
Unfortunately.
I want to say, in some respects, India City is kind of a nice place in that there's one of the valuable centers of genetic diversity. India is. That area in India is a center of genetic diversity. There are 7 centers of genetic diversity around the world, and one of them includes India.
Genetic diversity means
Plant genetic diversity. Anyway, there.
You've given a very dramatic, shall we say, discussion of what is happening in India in particular. It seems to be, within a given economic system, almost no way out. The only way out that you've mentioned is agrarian reform, which I would suggest may be something which definitely, obviously, redistributes wealth and redistributes power. But if you still have a capitalist agricultural system, won't you eventually get back to where you are now? That you may level the playing field by agrarian reform. But as long as the system continues to function as it has functioned, won't you eventually then end up with the same playing field that you had before, more or less, with very wealthy farmers, large scale, versus small and marginal farmers on the other side, if that is all you do?
Yes, I think you made a very interesting point. To be very frank, I have not really touched upon on the policy issues. What I was trying to really do is to study the impact of growth on the poor section. I quite agree with you. I mean, there are two situations here. I mean, in India we have tried land reform measures. We have not been very successful on ceiling on land holding and tenancy, but we have been fairly successful as far as removal of landlordism is concerned, what we call zamindari system, which was there before 1950. We have totally eliminated the landlord and the revenue collection system with the zamindari system. So I don't think there is any hope as far as the land reform is concerned in India. We have tried and there is no possibility now. I mean, even if you take empirical data, if you want to distribute a land, the per capita land will be less than half acre. So there is no scope of land reform measure as such. Now, what has been happening now is that the major emphasis is on this. I'll come to the substantial point later on. The major point is this, that we should try to see that we should discourage the mechanical technology. That is what government is trying to do through changing the factor prices, putting restriction on the tractor and other things. That is one thing. So that basically you go for a biochemical technology, which is labor intensive technology, which will absorb more of labor. So you have a model of agriculture development which generate more of employment by restricting the adoption of mechanical technology as such. So that is what the government of India is at the moment doing. You might see another way of revolution in India. Now they are switching over to Eastern India. Eastern India has got a much better irrigation resources, much better soil, and much better other facilities, but it has a very outmoded agrarian structure. It has certain element of semi-feudalism, concentration of land, tenancy, adverse tenancy. But now 7th Five Plan emphasis on Eastern India, and you might see that the output of rice might go rapidly in India as such. So we might be exporting that. So now the focus is that you introduce a green revolution technology which is labor absorbing. This is number one. Number two, they know that in spite of that, the employment generation will not be enough to absorb the additional increase in the labor force, and that your secondary sector is not able to provide them the employment. That is why most of these countries, Pakistan, Bangladesh, including India, they have introduced a very mass scale program of employment generation by the government. They have around 1,500 million rupees earmarked for the employment generation through public work program. So whenever there is a scarcity of job in lean season, they provide employment to the landless laborer so that they have money and they can buy certain amounts of things. The wages are given partly in terms of food and partly in terms of cash. So the whole thrust is on employment generation as such, and they are trying to do this. That the economic system cannot take care of it, so outside the system you go for it. How long you can go, that's a different question, because how long you can sustain the employment program without internal generation. Now the very substantial point you have raised, and in fact time was limitation. And this is what Marxists have been arguing in India. That look, you have a land reform, you have a land reform, and you have a peasantry wherein mostly dominated by middle farmer, small farmer, and you have a large farmer. And at the same time you allow the agriculture to develop on capitalist land. There is no any other alternative. Within the given political system, you might go for collective farming as on Chinese pattern, but given the political system, what you are essentially going to have is the capitalist farming as such. The farmer who is producing with the intention of generating profit. Now, the reformist basic argument is that whenever you have capitalism in agriculture and commercialization in agriculture, tendency of polarization will increase. There is no way out. You see in US, because the small cannot survive in front of large, because they have economic advantage always over the small one, and as a result the small ones are under economic stress, and in the process they tend to lose the control over the land. So there is a concentration of land in the hand of the few, and you have the polarized model as you have here as such. So that is what going to be happen. And another argument is this: the reformists are basically opposed to this program of asset creation. You are giving money to buy a buffalo, you are giving money to a marginal farmer to buy a fertilizer, you are giving money to buy a marginal farmer to dig a well or whatever. Now they are saying that you are giving the money, but they don't have enough capacity, they don't have enough land base, resource base to take the advantage of new technology. They take the loan, and what has been happening is that there is a diversion of this production loan to the consumption, and eventually they are indebted. And rather than benefiting, you find that they are in a different position. So they say that this giving some help to the petty producer, to the small farmer, is not going to help. They are going to wipe out in the onslaught of capitalist development as such. What you need is basically give them the permanent employment through the certain changes in the agriculture situation. So that is there. That is certainly going to be there, and I agree with you.
I missed the answer. With capitalism, there's going to be real big farmers are going to grow, the little marginal farmers will be wiped out. What's the answer? What's the Marxist suggestion?
Marxist suggests that you have the whole of China. You go for a collective farming. You go for a the interesting thing is that as far as the agriculture is concerned, even in communist country, you find that there are a lot of variations. You take Hungary and you take Poland, you have a private agriculture, it's a communist society. In China they had a collective farm, but they didn't go for a collective farm in the very beginning. They started with cooperatives at the resource level, they went for a collective farming, and after having tried the collective farming for some time, now they have gone for a decollectivization and they have gone for a peasant cultivation. In Israel, for example, it's a democratic country and they have this collective farming, kibbutz, they have moshav, which is a cooperative farming. In Russia, they are going for some sort of a private farming. But the point is that the agriculture has been a difficult sector, whether to organize on a collective farming or on a certain other basis. But the alternatives are there. I mean, if you have a large number of small farmers, then you have the alternative that you can go for collective farming. We tried in India. In fact, in early 50s, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, our first Prime Minister, sent a team to China to study the collective